My name is Danielle Argoni. I'm Managing Director of Policy and Solutions here at National Housing Trust, and we are very glad that you've joined us for our fourth IRA Bootcamp session. This is a busy time, as you know, lots of new news to share, lots of good resources to point your way, and lots of good conversation, I think, to be had, both amongst this group and with our guests today. So we're really anxious to get started. Next slide, please. Thanks. So here's a quick look at our agenda. We're going to be focusing in particular on Department of Energy and Environmental Protection Agency, both of whom have issued guidance in recent days or announcements in recent days that help us better understand how owners can tap these important resources. So Todd Netwick from NHT will once again bring to you the latest there, as well as some new information about how multifamily housing is situated within the program guidance, which is exciting. Then we've got some guests from the Climate United Coalition, which is a coalition of several organizations, which you'll hear about shortly. And the focus of that conversation will be on the largest of the three pillars under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that EPA is administering. So we'll have a really robust conversation about what that research could mean for you, and a chance for you to share what kind of financing tools would be most helpful to you in doing your business, in supporting your owners, in delivering affordable, sustainable, resilient multifamily housing. We'll do that in some breakout rooms to allow for some conversation. So please do prepare to come on camera, come on mic, or off mute rather, and get ready to talk with your colleagues and with our guests here. We'll also do a report out from the cohort learning optional opportunity that happened, I think it was last week or maybe the week before. This is yet another opportunity for us to kind of have some unstructured time to learn from one another. In contrast to these sessions where we tend to talk at you, these sessions are more about you talking to one another. And John Manuel is on that line here. It helped moderate a really productive and interesting conversation. So we're going to have Jeannie Redondo from New Mexico share a little bit about that, and then we'll give you a quick preview of what's to come. So with that, let me turn it over to my colleague, Todd Netwick.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. Last we met, we were joined by DOE. They provided an overview of the home energy rebate programs, and we were all wondering when the guidance would come out, and the guidance has come out. DOE released the guidance late last week, and so we thought we would just spend a few minutes kind of providing a high-level overview of some of the sort of main takeaways that we see in that guidance. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive kind of analysis. We are ourselves still sort of digesting what DOE released in multiple documents. So more to come, but just wanted to just quickly provide an update for folks. And to start with, just a reminder about the home energy rebate program. So DOE's rebate programs include actually two separate rebate programs, the home energy efficiency rebate program and the home electrification rebate program. These are programs that are not exclusive to low-income households, but there are higher incentive levels for low-income households in the program. So for single-family homes where the household income is below 80% AMI, and in multifamily buildings where more than half of households have incomes below 80% MI, these are the rebate levels for each of the programs. And just a reminder, again, the home energy efficiency program is intended to provide whole building energy retrofits that achieve at least a 20% energy savings. And for low-income households, there is an incentive level capped at $8,000 per home or per housing unit. And then for the home electrification rebate program, there is for low-income households up to 100% of the project costs could be covered for specific high-efficiency electric equipment to a max of $14,000 per home or per housing unit. Next slide. So wanted to just, again, share some high-level takeaways from the guidance, starting with what we think is a great outcome. Something that NHT and our partners have really been advocating for is a specific minimum requirement for serving low-income households and for serving low-income multifamily households. So DOE has basically established minimum rebate reservation requirements for both low-income and low-income multifamily households. States must reserve at least 40% of their allocations for low-income households, and states must reserve at least 10% of their rebate allocations specifically for low-income multifamily households, in addition to that 40% low-income requirement. So all totaled, states must spend 50% of their rebates on low-income households, which, when you add it up, amounts to about $2.5 billion nationwide. There is a caveat. States can request authority to reallocate those funds if they make a good faith effort to spend that funding, but cannot do so within 5 years. We also were really focused on making sure that DOE allows the rebates to be used for upgrades to central system and common areas to make sure that these opportunities address fully the energy and electrification opportunities at the buildings. And DOE is allowing the rebates to be used for central systems and common areas with a couple of caveats. One being that the electrification rebates can only fund central system and common area upgrades that also benefit individual dwelling units. There isn't any guidance that I have seen about how to determine whether or not an upgrade benefits individual dwelling units in addition to the common area, but we'll certainly be tracking that. And then another caveat is that for the electrification rebates, the central heat pump water heating systems are not currently eligible because there isn't an Energy Star certification, and the rebates can only fund Energy Star certified appliances. Next slide. This okay, there we go. Thanks. A few other key highlights. We wanted to make sure that there's streamlined income documentation options, obviously because of the administrative burden of income verifying and every unit in a building. And DOE is requiring states to allow for categorical eligibility based on participation in other low-income federal programs. DOE has released a list of those programs that currently qualify for categorical eligibility. And importantly, on that list are several housing programs, including public housing, project-based assistance, tenant-based assistance, and low-income housing tax credits. DOE is requiring minimum affordability and tenant protection requirements for at least 2 years after the receipt of the rebate. Building owners must continue to rent to a low-income tenant. They are not able to evict tenants for reasons related to the building upgrades. They cannot increase the rent for reasons related to the building upgrade. And there must be a process for providing written notification to tenants of their rights, and states must identify how they're going to enforce these requirements. And just to clarify, just like the rebate reservation set-asides, this is a minimum requirement, so states can certainly go above and beyond what DOE is requiring. And then finally, it's very clear from the language that DOE is looking for states to design rebate programs that are going to leverage other funding sources, and including integrating the rebates into existing programs. So that's an opportunity for potentially HFAs seeking to integrate these rebates into some existing programs that you all provide. Next slide. And so that's a highlight of some of the key takeaways. Again, it's not comprehensive. It's also clear that there are a lot of decisions that will be left up to the states. I've highlighted a few of them here. DOE is not mandating a specific program design for reaching low-income households. That will be up to the states to put together. States have the ability to ask DOE if they can increase the maximum rebate amounts above what I shared earlier. Again, states have the ability to exceed the minimum rebate reservation requirements if they so choose. There is this question of in multifamily buildings where more than half of the units meet the income eligibility threshold. Do all the units in that building then qualify for rebates, or just those units, or just those units that that specifically meet that income eligibility requirement? So if you have 60% of the units in the building that qualify, do all of the units qualify, or just those 60%? And it looks like DOE has not issued any sort of requirement there, and that it's up to the states to make a decision. So that's something that will be a key decision for states to make. Again, the minimum tenant requirements, protection requirements, are the minimum that states can have to choose, but can also go above and beyond. And then, of course, the DOE is deferring to states in terms of what types of what existing programs they want to integrate the rebates with. So again, that's just a really quick kind of summary of some of the key takeaways. I know there's probably a lot of interest in this, and there might be some questions, and we unfortunately don't have too much time today for that, but we'll certainly make sure that there are opportunities going forward to really dig into this guidance and to figure out how to ensure that these programs are really maximizing opportunities for low-income households. Next slide. So with that said, now I will we'll sort of dig into the main topic of today's bootcamp session, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes kind of providing an overview for folks. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but just as a reminder, wanted to just mention that there are 3 separate competitions within the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. There's the National Clean Investment Fund, which is what we'll be focusing on for this session. And really the intent behind the National Clean Investment Fund is to support national financing institutions to develop financial assistance to serve the qualified projects under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And that's a $14 billion pot of money that will be allocated to 2 to 3 national nonprofit financing entities. Then there's the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator competition, which is really intended to bolster the capacity of community lenders to provide financing for clean technology projects. And this particular pot of money will provide funding to capitalize community lenders, as well as to provide technical assistance to increase the capacity of community lenders. And then there's a Solar for All program, which is, as you would imagine, is intended specifically to support residential rooftop and community solar in low-income communities. Next slide. So just wanted to get into a little bit more detail about the NCIF and specifically the project priorities that EPA has outlined. And I think this slide's a little bit cut off, but there are essentially 3 priority qualified project categories that EPA is focusing on: distributed energy generation and storage, net zero emissions buildings, and the 3rd category is electrifying transportation. So looking specifically at the net zero emission building project, qualified project category, EPA is clearly looking at projects, activities, and technologies that apply both to retrofitting an existing building to make it as close as possible to net zero, as well as supporting the construction of new net zero emission buildings in low income and disadvantaged communities. And EPA is really clear in the NOFO that the intent behind this project category of net zero emission buildings is to really make an outsized impact on delivering affordable and sustainable housing. And so this EPA has identified specific criteria for low-income disadvantaged communities, and one of the 4 categories is affordable housing. So for affordable housing properties that have an affordability covenant, And I've included here some of the specific affordable housing programs that EPA identifies in the NOFO. And to the extent that the rents at these buildings do not exceed 30% of 80% AMI for at least half of the units. That qualifies as low income and disadvantaged community under the EPA requirements. And also EPA has included naturally occurring affordable housing where rents do not exceed 30% or of 80% of AMI for at least half of the units as also qualifying for the disadvantaged community criteria. Next slide. And then just wanted to really highlight some of the potential forms of financial assistance that are eligible under NCIF. They include debt, such as loans, partially forgivable loans, zero interest and below market interest loans, equity, so equity project finance investments, private equity investments, hybrids, as well as credit enhancements, loan guarantees, loan loss reserves. Subgrants are not eligible under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So the financial assistance does not include grants that are not repayable as eligible for funding. And grantees of the NCIF can provide financial assistance to various types of counterparties, project sponsors, as well as community lenders and other similar institutions. And also the allowable costs include, in addition to the financing for qualified projects, EPA recognizes that there's additional investment needs to support the market for Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund technologies and building upgrades. And so some of the funding can be used for pre-development activities, such as building assessments, energy assessments, market building activities, such as outreach and investing in communication, workforce, as well, of course, program administration activities. Next slide. Before I hand it over to our guests, I wanted to also highlight briefly that as of yesterday, or as of July 31st, states had to submit to EPA a notice of intent that they're going to apply for the Solar for All program. And EPA just last night released the list of states and territories, or states and district in Puerto Rico that have opted in essentially to putting together an application for Solar for All. So we're really interested in understanding if any of your agencies are currently participating or are planning to participate in the Solar for All application in your state, and would actually ask folks now if you wouldn't mind to add your name and agency to the chat. And we're doing this because we'd like to, convene a cohort of agencies that are participating in the Solar for All, so that we can, provide a space for you all to, to have conversation and to support each other through this process. So appreciate you all for doing that. And I think with that, I'm going to be turning it over to our guest speaker. One of the potential applicants of the NCIF competition is United Climate, which consists of several organizations that NHT has been working with for some time. And we invited them here today to really share their thinking about opportunities in NCIF for affordable housing, as well as to hear from all of you in terms of what the financing and technical assistance needs are for really serving the affordable housing staff. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Sadie to have her introduce herself and the rest of the team.
Thank you, Todd. I'm Sadie McEwen with the Community Preservation Corporation. We are a member of Climate United, and I'm going to turn it over to our fearless leader, Beth Baffert from Calvert Impact to start us off. Beth?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with everyone today. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, I'm Beth Baffert. I lead strategy and new product development at Calvert Impact. Calvert Impact is a 30-year-old nonprofit financial institution based in the Washington, D.C. area, really focused on connecting capital and communities. And we're thrilled to be partnering with CPC and Self-Help and many other partners across the country to put together a strategy for the National Clean Investment Fund competition of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So we wanted to do today is just walk through at a high level the Climate United strategy and some thinking about structure. And then our partners at CPC and Self-Help will talk more specifically about the multifamily and single family housing strategy within the overall application. So with that, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So as mentioned, Climate United is a collaboration of experienced lenders really dedicated to bringing clean energy solutions to Justice 40 communities across the country. So what we wanted to do was pull together a coalition that were individually extremely strong organizations with a clear demonstration and commitment to decarbonizing the economy with an equity lens, but also to create something that collectively allowed us to have a national cross-sector strategy where we could really manage a significant portion of the NCIF funds. So that's the groups that have come together. Next slide. And the focus overall is at the highest level of what we're trying to solve is really looking at how do we create the opportunity for clean technologies that we know are benefiting everyday Americans, things like electric vehicles, electric buses, electric and solar powered homes, things that technologies that are driving cost savings, driving health improvements. How do we make sure that those products are accessible to low-income families and small businesses across the country? And because those products often are sold at a premium or are more expensive, it requires an upfront cost to access them before you accrue those benefits. There's a real need for access to credit and financing and the technical expertise for implementation. And so what we're trying to do is across sectors really try to bridge that gap, provide access to credit and financing where it's not happening today, so that we can drive adoption of these clean technologies, increase demand for those technologies, show people the real benefit of the low carbon transition in their individual lives, which we think will help spur more demand and create kind of virtuous cycle of increased demand, lower cost, and broader adoption. So that's kind of the highest level of the challenge we're trying to solve. You can go to the next slide. And so the ways in which we're focused on implementation is really in these three main pillars. We're looking at bringing the benefits of electrification and clean energy to low-income families and small businesses across the country, so they feel the benefits through lower energy bills, cleaner air, greater security and resiliency, and clean transportation to get gas prices out of your family's budget. Two is to decarbonize the places where people live, work, and play, really looking at housing and community facilities as core pillars of that strategy. And then three is supporting and scaling local community lenders, which includes CDFIs, community development credit unions, green banks, HFAs, and others that are really so that we have a robust network of we're calling climate champions, climate finance champions across the country who are able to understand and implement these solutions locally. Next slide. And then across the work, if you look, think about all the sectors and all the activities across the strategy, what are really the themes or the outcomes that we want to be driving towards? And our major areas of focus here are really looking at what we're calling multidimensional impact. So as we think about the transition, how are we making sure that the benefits of the transition are accruing to individuals that often lack opportunity? So looking at every investment decision and opportunity for contracting, for services, for access, and looking at how we're making those benefits accrue to and creating kind of income and wealth generating activities for low income and disadvantaged communities areas that are often hard to reach or under-resourced, so that we can be driving those co-benefits, those additional benefits alongside the GHG reduction, to make this program as impactful as possible, and really get the biggest bang of the buck out of from these federal dollars. 2 is really looking at this market transformation. So looking at how, as we're creating the financial products and the ways in which we're going to finance the transition, looking at how we're also educating the broader credit markets to adopt and adapt these standards. So looking at how we're increasing transparency, setting standards, looking at data collection, asset track record, really building the case that these assets and these communities are financeable and should be adopted into the broader capital markets, so that there is a longer term path to efficiency and scale, and that over time we can burn down the need for subsidy and have broader adoption across the US economy. And then lastly is really ensuring that all of the work that we will be doing together is essentially acting as a petri dish for future state, local, and federal policy. So we will be testing a lot of solutions on how to really drive demand, behavior change, and adoption of clean technologies in low-income communities. And once we kind of get it right, we want to make sure that those lessons are being spread across the country, reflected in policies, whether it's certain building standards or certain design standards, whether it's code that's updated, certain regulations that come through to really provide additional forcing mechanisms for behavior change that can be driven by local, state, or federal policymaking. So those are some of the themes across the work that we want to make sure we keep in mind as we think about program design, so that we're driving to those outcomes over time. Next slide. And I think lastly, before I turn it over I think I have a couple more, is really looking for ways to leverage existing infrastructure and platforms to get these funds out. We're balancing this need for extreme urgency because of the timeline of the climate crisis and the urgency to get to our country's 2030 goals so that we're on track for country's 2050 net zero goals, balancing that with impact and access, making sure we're not just pushing money into the easiest place to put money, but really making sure that we're getting it deep into communities that can benefit. And so one of the ways we see to do that is really leveraging these platforms or existing market infrastructure, plugging in, making it easy and frictionless, or a little friction as possible, to try to reach a broad set of buildings, a broad set of homeowners, a broad set of vehicles, really looking at how we can find those nodes. And I think that's one of the really important roles that the HFAs play across the country, is acting as that important platform that really touches buildings across the state, and looking at how we leverage that infrastructure to make sure deployment is fast, but also reaching into the buildings that can most benefit. Next slide. And so as we think about impact, I touched on this a little bit on driving kind of this multidimensional impact. What we really want to be looking at when we're looking at qualified projects is understanding who is benefiting. So you'll see in each of this kind of this who benefits bullet point, but really looking at, as we're creating job opportunities, as we're creating economic savings, as we're creating wealth building opportunities through home value appreciation and business ownership, as we're improving air quality and expanding access, who is benefiting from those opportunities, and how do we make sure that wherever possible, we use our levers to increase access, increase impact across these variables. And what we've done is kind of map those co-benefits that we really care about with the co-benefits that allow a project to qualify as a qualified project. So there are 4, you have to meet one of 4 co-benefits to qualify as a qualified project. There has to be a training or workforce development component, provide affordable and sustainable housing, provide access to clean energy or energy efficiency, or access to clean transportation. And so really looking at those as table stakes, right? Those are things that have to be true to be a qualified project to access financing, and then putting our additional layer of impact on top, saying here's really what we're trying to drive towards to make sure that we see kind of optimized impact across the program. Next slide. And then lastly, just kind of, the why us, we're really excited about the combination of strong financial management, experience deploying and executing on transactions at this intersection of the low carbon transition and low income communities, and the trust that's been built in communities over time. So each of the organizations that are a part of Climate United and many of our partners, right, have been around for decades doing this work, really trying to grade and blend various sources of capital to reach the social and environmental outcomes that we're seeking, and really trying to bring that expertise, that strength in financial management, our experience leveraging private capital to bear for this program. And so really excited about the partnership, really excited for the opportunity to work with states and state agencies and HFAs across the country to ensure that implementation happens at that balance. Urgency of getting the work done, but making sure it's done in a really high quality way to drive impact across the community. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to our friends at CPC.
Thanks, Beth. So as I said before, I'm Sadie McEwen. I'm the president of the Community Preservation Corporation. CPC is a national multifamily lender. We're both a construction lender as well as a permanent lender. We have the only nonprofit mortgage bank in the country with 7 licenses with Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and FHA, in partnership with NEF and SINAIR, 2 other national CDFIs. You can go to the next slide. CPC has been trying to do sustainable, affordable lending for the last 15 years without a sole source of capital to support sustainability. We've used every source that we can to try to get sustainability and high performance into the buildings that we finance. Incentives from utilities. Here in New York, we have lots of incentives through NYSERDA. But as we all know, working in affordable housing, we cannot take resources away from affordability because we also have an affordable housing crisis in this country. And so last year when the IRA was announced and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was in there, CPC was very excited about now all of a sudden having a source to address sustainability alongside of affordability in the work that we do. So we're a construction lender, a mortgage company, and we also do equity investing. You can go to the next slide, please. Our approach in thinking about how to use this source of capital and the work that we do to try and really drive national decarbonization and significant greenhouse gas reduction in the built environment is really to look at that in as transformative a way as we possibly can. If you've heard me speak before, you've heard me say that this is a lot of money, 27 billion, 14 billion, 369 billion. But in the grand scheme of things, as it relates to decarbonizing the built environment, it's not that much money. And so unless we are able to inform and transform the existing capital markets around how to address decarbonization in the work that they do, we won't have moved the needle in climate change. And so one of our big goals is to look at creating market transformation through the multifamily mortgage markets, working with a series of different partners, including HFAs, to give you a tool to routinely address carbon in the work that you're doing. And so that's our biggest idea. We want to provide, obviously, high quality, low carbon, clean, resilient, and healthy homes in low income and disadvantaged communities. We're an affordable housing lender. We do a lot of workforce housing, but at our core, our largest medical is affordability. Most of what we do is subsidize affordable housing. And so we really see the Justice 40 overlay as a sweet spot for us. And then Beth alluded to creating industry standards and best practices. We've already invested in a whole effort to understand the technical components of how to decarbonize buildings nationally in different climates, different topologies, with different political overlays. There's all kinds of considerations. And we're trying to get a sense within the 10 different EPA regions, how to get to decarbonization in buildings in each of those areas. And then, of course, broadly collaborating with lots and lots of partners, both lenders, trade organizations, workforce development organizations, to really think together and educate each other on how to do this so that we can learn from one another as we go. One of the things we recognize at CPC and lots of the sustainability work that we do is there's a lot to be learned in this very, very early, very difficult stage of the transition. And if we're not all learning at the same time, we get set back over and over again, and we can't afford to do that. So the scale of this program is very exciting because we can bring all of that learning forward to HFAs and to other lenders and to multifamily affordable housing owners across the country. Next slide, please. And so CPC's approach, we're calling our part of Climate United CPC Green, and our implementation platform includes these 4 verticals. As I said, we want to work through mortgage banks, which is our Freddie and Fannie and FHA platform. We want to work through HFAs, which I'll talk more about in a second. CDFI lenders, really animating that network of multifamily CDFI lenders in the country who can go over to the CCIA and get capacity building and build out their platforms and then come to us for direct capital for projects. And then also trying to work with banks, pension funds, and other lenders through a sustainable mortgage product that we've created, because these are all of the multifamily capital providers that need to begin to think about and address carbon in the work that they do. And so particular to the work that you do as HFAs, this will be very low cost capital at the very bottom of the stack. We will not fight with lawyers for lien position. We will make this capital as long term and amortization as is needed to not take up any more space in the debt coverage ratio. These have to be loans, as Beth mentioned, or as Todd mentioned, but they can be forgivable loans. They can be cash flow only notes. They can marry with whatever your sources of capital that are already in the deal require. So you need it to be a loan for tax credit purposes, it can be a loan, but it doesn't necessarily have to pay debt service along the way if a deeply affordable project can't afford to do that. Any money that does come back to the project goes right back into deals. It does not go to Calvert or to CPC, it goes right back into loans for multifamily projects. So we are really looking to work with this existing network of lenders. Next slide, please. And really, I'm not going to get into too much detail on this slide. You'll get the deck, but we're trying to look at this as the same way that lenders look at radon and asbestos and lead paint and all the other environmental conditions. The IRA names carbon as a pollutant. From our perspective, it should be considered like everything else in the phase 1 process, so that it must be addressed at the time of closing. And so we've been trying to do that without a source of capital to say, and here's money to help you get there. Now we finally have money to help owners actually get there. So that's what we think of when we think of transforming the mortgage markets. As a practical matter, private capital providers are going to begin needing to disclose the amount of carbon they have and the investments that they're making, because disclosure is coming to the financial markets. And so this then becomes a way for financial companies to say, how do I do this? Let me look at what this Climate United or whoever it is that gets this money is doing to figure out and learn how to do this ourselves. We hope to create templates for decarbonization, again, based on climate, property type, and affordability. You can go to the next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Italia Howe, and she is going to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say decarbonization, because as we all know, you can change a light bulb and reduce greenhouse gas, but we're talking about a lot more than that. Italia. Italia, if you're there, you're on mute. Oh. It looks like she's having trouble connecting to her audio. Can't hear you, Italia.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that. So we could probably spend a whole session on this topic alone, but I will just go through these 2 slides quickly and then pass it over to a colleague at Self-Help to talk about the single family strategy. But so, we've heard the word a lot today, decarbonization. So what does it actually mean? There's really 3 key drivers to get at decarbonization, and this applies to both single family and multifamily. So grid decarbonization and on-site solar. As the electricity supply gets cleaner, the emissions from energy efficient and electrified buildings will decrease. So the carbon footprint or the carbon output of an all electric building today will decrease as the grid gets cleaner. And by cleaner, when we talk about the grid getting cleaner, we mean powered by more renewable energy versus being powered by fossil fuel energy. So 100% renewable energy grid of the future, which is, many states and the federal government also has goals around getting these energy grids to 100% renewable energy in the future. That means that an all electric building today will be net zero emissions building, which is also a priority project category of the EPA, and we can get into that, this concept of net zero emissions buildings. So again, with grid decarbonization, the focus then really is on electrification of buildings, and again, both single family, multifamily. So this is really the process of converting, fossil fuel based equipment. So that's your HVAC, that's your domestic hot water system, to efficient electric equipment. So heat pumps, right? Mini splits, they can be central systems. And that significantly decreases both emissions, given the first point above, but also site energy use. So it's a good strategy for reducing energy use as well. And then last, but definitely not least, is energy efficiency. Reducing energy consumption, on site is key to decarbonization. And I really like this next sentence: the cleanest kilowatt hour is the one you never use. And I think that's a really good thing to take away as you think about this 3-pronged approach, if you will. Next slide, please. So this just highlights that, I think the key to, deep emissions and energy savings is really kind of a holistic integrated approach. If you just focus on electrification only, as you can see in scenario 1, you're going to obviously see some emissions and site energy savings, but you really need to combine these strategies when looking to reach, that kind of 35% energy savings, kind of bar, if you will. So, looking at scenario 4, you can see electrification and energy efficiency together. You're getting quite a bit of savings there. But then you also have to take into account what your baseline or existing systems are. So if you're switching from a resistance electric heat to a high, heat pump, which is much more energy efficient, and then doing some efficiency measures, or in scenario 7, you're doing electrification, you're switching from resistance electric heating to heat pumps, and you're doing some energy efficiency work. I mean, you're really seeing significant savings. So again, these are just some scenarios to play with, or think about, I should say, as you're thinking about different strategies for your owners and developers and the kind of the options that are open to them. So with that, and just being mindful of time, I will pass it over to James from Self-Help to talk about the single family strategy.
Dahlia. Hi, everyone. My name is James Juro. I lead business development for Self-Help's Affordable Homeownership Program. And I thought you could jump to the next slide. Just want to start with a quick background on Self-Help and our secondary market program, which I think provides helpful context for our single family strategy with Climate United. So Self-Help started lending in the 1980s. Since then, I've grown to a national CDFI with $5 billion in total assets, have a family of 4 nonprofits that we use together to fight for economic justice in marginalized communities. Now, the bulk of our work is housed in our 2 credit unions, one federally chartered, one state chartered. And you can see on the map here, credit unions serve over 192,000 members across 75 retail branches in the Southeast, the West Coast, Midwest, in those orange states. So out of those branches, we make consumer loans, we make mortgages, do auto loans, your typical retail banking services. But our home ownership mission reaches into every state. So in the 1990s, we received a $50 million grant from the Ford Foundation to create a secondary market to expand access to home ownership for low-income families and scale our impact beyond our credit union footprint. And so to do this, we leverage partnerships with Fannie and Freddie as takeout liquidity and over 30 banks and credit unions and other CDFIs as the direct originators. And then over those past 20 years, we've purchased roughly 7 billion in mortgages across every state here. Some loans we hold on our balance sheet, and others will add a credit enhancement and sell those to Fannie and Freddie, where we retain basically the top loss recourse, similar to the risk that a mortgage insurance company would hold. And so for the next slide, shifting to Climate United and our strategy for single family greenhouse gas reduction fund, we really modeled it after the success of our secondary market program, and that's the inspiration. And so our goal is to use this new subsidy source as a loan loss reserve to leverage private capital and facilitate a secondary market for green mortgages. So idea is to make it easier and cheaper for borrowers to finance energy efficiency home improvements into their first mortgage. And we see the key value add is we'd eliminate the cost of private mortgage insurance. So borrowers can go higher on LTV up to 97, maybe even 100 LTV, roll those green upgrades into their mortgage essentially at the cost of an 80 LTV mortgage, and then start reaping the energy savings and the utility bill savings ASAP. And we think this is a much cheaper cost of consumer financing than the alternative, where a borrower would postpone those improvements and down the road take out a HELOC or a consumer loan or a credit card debt, which would just be a much higher cost of financing. And so as part of the EPA NOFO, we're envisioning applying this strategy to both decarbonizing existing homes and then the new construction of net zero houses. And we do that with two products. So the first would be the purchase refi mortgage to upgrade existing homes. So everything weatherization to green HVAC, putting solar panels on the roof. And then the second is using construction to perm financing product for new construction of net zero homes in low-income communities. So the overall concept is to start with reducing the cost barriers and create a better value proposition for homeowners to go green and to use the greenhouse gas subsidy as the loan loss reserve, and then channel a network of community lenders across the country to deploy the capital.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Climate United team. I think that's your last slide. Is that right? Okay.
Yep.
We now that's a lot of information to take in. I think it's clear that some big changes are on the horizon, and I think regardless of how the awards get made by EPA, this is the beginning of a way of doing business and quantifying the sort of carbon impacts of our work. So I think it's really important, and I think I know that we really appreciate the opportunity to chime in here and share some thoughts about how this will all work for our industry. So with that, we're going to break everyone into breakout rooms. We've divided the HFA participants into regions so that you can sort of work with like-minded folks with respect to like what your owners understand, what the challenges are, the climate challenges are that you're facing, and the like. We have 3 questions that we'd like you to dig in on, and we really do want this to be kind of an active conversation from each of you. So we have about, I think, 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes for these breakout groups. One of the Climate United folks will be in each one of the rooms, so you'll be able to ask them some follow-up questions if you have them. They'll be, minding the sort of discussion. I would ask that one of the HFA participants volunteer to report out back to the larger group when we reconvene, probably around, let's say 3:03, something like that. So we have about 7 minutes for a report out, and then we'll wrap up with some news out of another cohort learning experience that happened in tandem as well. Before I break, are there any really, really quick questions, points of clarification that need to be put to the Climate United team before we go into breakout rooms that somebody is just chomping at the bit to ask? I didn't see any in the chat. And as I said, you will have a Climate United person in your breakout room, so you can always direct your questions to them at that time. All right, with that, Madeline, please go ahead and break us up into our rooms, and we'll reconvene here at 3:03, 3 minutes after the hour, wherever time zone you're in.
If you have any questions about which room you should join, you can let me know. And then for Climate United staff, I'll put in the chat the assigned rooms for you all.
And for those who are still looking, look at the three dots at the bottom of your screen where it says more, and then select join breakout room, and then you will see the four different options, and you'll be able to self-identify. Thanks.
If you don't see your state or if you have any questions, you can let me know and I can start assigning those who haven't joined the room yet.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that that was helpful and meaty and informative. We do want to be able to share a little bit what came up in your groups. I think, this is a benefit to other HFAs. It's a benefit to the whole Climate United team and really to us as we think about how we can continue to shape it. Trying to influence the degree that we can these programs as they get stood up. So why don't we start with breakout group 1? Who is speaker from breakout group 1? And I'm trying to refresh my memory on which geography that was. Madeline, perhaps you can. But breakout group 1.
Northeast.
Okay, perfect. Northeast.
I don't think we assigned a speaker. Does somebody from my group want to volunteer, or do you want me to jump in?
You did a fabulous job, Sadie. Go ahead.
And very brief, a minute.
Very
tops.
brief. So a couple things that came up for us was the need for pre-development capital. So including the upfront work around sizing, scoping the carbon reduction, the energy audit as a grant, just so everyone knows that's a grant that comes with the loan that you do. We talked about the challenges for smaller developers. Also that some of this really needs to align with states' energy goals because different states have different energy goals. And wanted to clarify, which we did, that the HFAs would be lending this money. This would not be a separate lender coming in, but the money would go through to the HFA to make the direct loan. And then on the topic of repayment, yes, if anything does get repaid, it goes back into the program. It comes back to Climate United and goes back into the program. But that rather than significant repayment in this program, we from our perspective, there'll be more like ongoing resubordination of these dollars, because there probably won't be an ability to repay at recapitalization. So I'll stop there unless my team wants to jump in and say anything else.
All right, let's move on to group 2.
We also didn't assign
Southeast.
someone because we're still talking. You got pulled back in. But anybody want to jump in? All right, I'll jump in. So actually, Sadie just answered a couple of the questions that came up in our session, which was helpful. But yeah, really some just clarifying questions on definitions in the program. Things like period of performance, how long these funds are seen to be kind of keep their federal character before the potential to recycle it without it. Conversations around how the funds come over to the HFAs and to the projects. And so I think Sadie, you just touched on that. And then towards the end, we started talking about whether this could be a new capital source to support existing programs or products that HFAs may have. And so just looking at kind of what are the existing programs that are in place, how can those be leveraged, and then kind of comparing. I think this is where the technical standards will be really important, kind of comparing existing standards to the expected standards in the GGRF to make sure that those are met. I think those were the big ones, and we did talk through kind of the allowable cost categories, including market development and pre-development, in order to support demand generation, customer acquisition, as well as specific project pre-development.
Great, thank you. Let's go to the Midwest. I think that's Natalia.
Great, that's me.
Oh, Catherine, great.
So we assigned someone, so we were ahead of the curve. But for question 1, we talked about needing both grants and deferred forgivable loans or traditional loans. Grants for retrofits where there might be thinner margins, but really from like a multifamily underwriting tax credit perspectives, loans are going to be easier to manage. We talked a lot about different ways to try and keep this simple, to try and keep closing simple, to just like keep this as simple as possible for us and for our developers. And then on the TA side, we talked a lot about not just needing TA for housing finance agencies, but really needing TA for developers, and the fact that our developers are starting to plan projects years in advance. In order for these types of loans, they have the support they need.
Thank you. Great. And let's wrap it up with the West and the Pacific. James or another volunteer.
I don't think we had a volunteer, but yeah, ditto to everything folks have already shared, and piggyback on the theme of TA needed at the HFA level, at the developer level, and also at the consumer level. It just sounded like it's still, a nascent market, still a lot of education that's needed around the subsidy available, around tax credits, around incentives to really drive more adoption of green energy efficiency upgrades in single family and multifamily.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And thanks to the Climate United team for joining us today. Really helpful to get an early read in on what this program might mean for HFAs and for our industry. It is a significant investment. I mean, $14 billion is going to shift the market, we hope. And so I think helping us get our heads around what that means is super helpful. So we appreciate all of your time and effort. We're going to now turn it over to Jeannie from New Mexico, who helped participate in and is going to report out from our first cohort sharing session. So you may recall that these are optional sessions where we have more of a time, kind of unstructured time for you all to talk to one another, learn from one another. We held our first one last Wednesday, and Jenny Redondo from Mexico Housing Finance Authority is here to talk, just share a little bit about what they talked about and encourage you all to participate in the next one. So Jeannie.
Okay, hello everyone. During our cohort sharing, we discussed factors that could impact a developer's motivation to pursue incentives offered under the Inflation Reduction Act, and how HFAs can facilitate a win-win-win climate for owners, HFAs, and the residents by leveraging the resources offered. We briefly touched on the status of the HUD-NOFO, where we heard that Department of Energy is just starting to release funds to states to develop their programs, so there isn't much traction at this point. We also discussed how to obtain a list of the projects in our states that qualify for the HUD-NOFO. HUD's web-based database lists all of the properties. So if your state administers contracts on HUD's behalf, that office should also have a list of eligible properties. In the meantime, some states are reaching out to their development communities, and some are looking to see where they can align their programs to encourage owners to use HUD's incentives. Some push developers to use utility incentives and would continue to do so here. Others are having asset managers reach out to owners who could use these incentives as a one-off. And here in New Mexico, we're hoping to pair HUD's incentives with our preservation program that we're working to get off the ground. We also discussed whether developers incorporating the 45L credit into their projects, and heard about a few projects that have done so. In the past, some developers used the third-party solar lease to get around the eligible basis reduction, but that's no longer necessary. There were still a lot of questions that will hopefully be answered when the IRS issues final guidance. The DOE home energy rebates are unlikely to be available until later this year or early 2024. There was also concern that there's a potential for building owners to cash in the rebates that could have been used to fill financing gaps. New York State is collaborating with their state energy office to set up models where the state energy office transfers the ability to deliver the rebate through the HFA. They're also looking at setting up a recyclable grant program to fund the anticipated rebates upfront, and then have the rebates paid to the HFA to replenish the grant fund when they're eligible for the rebate. Some of us are also looking for ways to include these resources in our underwriting, and we're planning to incorporate what we are learning about the solar credits into our application this year. That's all I've got.
That's great. Thank you so much. And if you missed that session, or if you participated and want to participate in the next one, good news is there's another one coming up, tentatively slated for August 16th from 3 to 4 Eastern time. You'll see that on the calendar there. And let me turn that over to Madeline McCullough to close this out and to talk a little bit about what that session will feature.
Thanks, Danielle. So I know it says 2 to 3. It will be 3 to 4 Eastern time for our second cohort sharing on the 16th. We'll talk more about the Solar for All and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator through the EPA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and what role HFAs can play in that. So if you weren't able to join us for the first one, but you want to join the second, you can shoot me an email and I'll add you to the list. We decided to move our session at the end of August to September 13th, where we're going to focus on clean energy tax credits. Following that, on September 27th, we'll talk about QAPs and how HFAs can incorporate and integrate IRA funding into that plan. And then we are planning on being in person at NCSHA's conference in October in Boston. So if you're also planning on being there, or if you haven't decided yet, we will be having an in-person boot camp session then. So it'd be great if everyone who's able to can attend. And we'll send out invites for all of these sessions later this week. But if there are no other questions, that's all we have for today.
Thanks for joining, everyone. And thanks again to Climate United. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.